This is World Business Report from the BBC World Service. Hello, I'm Roger Hearing. Coming up on today's programme, the strength of India's economy as the world's largest economy gets ready for elections.
People who run factories are seeing a growth rate of 15% or more, regardless of whether you're talking medical devices, industrial goods, consumer products.
Now, this week on World Business Report, we're going to be looking ahead to the biggest elections taking place across the world and the economic stories in play. And we start with the biggest democracy there is, India. How strong is the Indian economy in its fundamentals? I spoke to Gunjan Bagla, who's author, broadcaster and CEO of Amritt, a consultancy firm that helps its clients launch their companies and services in India.
Whether you look at manufacturing numbers, you look at tax collections by the government, you look at the attitude of Indian companies and their executives, everything is looking very positive. So I think India is going to have a great 2024.
But how does this play for ordinary Indians? Do they have enough jobs? Do they have a high enough income? How are they feeling about this?
The demographics of India are very widely divided. There are the super rich and the super poor who barely have a meal to eat. On all fronts, India's economy is firing. So if you look at the poorest people in India, they have gained quite a bit from the growth of the economy. One thing that isn't understood well outside India is the impact of the universal payment interface, where a small peddler or any person wanting to get money from their customer can now get that funding through this UPI QR code, just a plastic card that has their QR code on it. And as soon as somebody wants to pay them, the money goes directly into their bank account and they hear an audio signal on their phone. So this method of commerce has really helped the poorest Indians, many of whom are collecting money on a day-to-day basis. They are living hand to mouth, but now they can, whether it's a flower seller or a vegetable seller, anybody like that can get paid very quickly. And that acceleration has caused more income to get to these poor people, but also since it goes to the bank, some of it gets saved rather than spent the same day. So it's going to be a long-term benefit for poor Indians. Now, the middle class has been growing for 20 years and their incomes have been growing for 20 years. The super rich in India are doing very well, thank you very much. So it's really firing at all levels at this time.
And how much of all this is down to Narendra Modi's government? He's been Prime Minister for a long time now. Is it something that just happens independent of the way the government runs the economy, or are the things that he does actually encouraging these things you're talking about?
I would say the primary benefit that Narendra Modi has brought to the Indian populace is the sense of self-confidence. Most people feel very positive. They feel confident that the future will be better than the past. And this certainly wasn't the India I grew up in, where people generally felt pessimistic about the future. So that's been a huge change. When people feel better about the future, they spend more money, they work harder, they work together, and that's been a huge impact. Now, the UPI that I described to you, for example, certainly happened during Narendra Modi's time, but the platform for it was laid down by the previous government.
What about what happens next, though? Because India is still an economy dominated by agriculture. Is that likely to change dramatically in the near future?
Yeah, absolutely. Manufacturing in India is growing by leaps and bounds. Most people who run factories are seeing a growth rate of 15% or more, regardless of whether you're talking medical devices, industrial goods, consumer products, you name it. So it will be more than a decade at least before agriculture becomes less than 50% of Indian employment. But it's absolutely going to happen.
Now, the reason we're speaking to you is obviously because of the Indian election coming up. It's very likely that Narendra Modi will win. It certainly seems so from the opinion polls at the moment. But is the consistency of him remaining in power, and therefore, I guess, a consistency of policy, is that important in a way for keeping India growing in the way it is?
There is no doubt that most of his cabinet is focused on India's betterment. The previous government had a number of ministers who were clearly corrupt, and some of them went to jail. We are not seeing that kind of activity with this government. No, it's not all good. Of course, many minorities are concerned about what's happening in India. And my hope is that when the Modi government comes into power next time, they won't be worried so much about re-election, and they won't focus on these populist issues, but rather on the job of growing the country and growing the economy and growing India's stature globally. That's something Modi is personally very motivated about, to see that India gets respect on the world stage.
Gunjan Bagla there speaking to me earlier. This is World Business Report from the BBC World Service.